My name is Hamjit Hassan. I'm the co-curator and co-founder of the DIY Cultures Festival, which has been going for 5 years and looks at intersections of art, activism and creative resistance. Just in the last 5 years or so, you've had this revival of fanzine culture. Fanzine is a cheap, photocopied, handmade publication, which is small press and small run. Despite all the smartphones and Facebooks and multiple forms of digital communication, there's this desire for face-to-face communities. So DIY Cultures was part of the new wave of zine festivals that would take place. There were others like Alternative Press Fair and London Zine Symposium. They had a distinguished identity because I noticed just sort of the aspect of sort of white domination within these spaces, which claim to be more non-hierarchical and inclusive, but are actually quite cliquey and reproduce race and class hierarchies. So DIY Cultures, you'll see something which is a zine fair, but representative of the world at large. So you'll see the continents of like Africa and Asia. You'll see forgotten histories like 1980s Liverpool and the resistances to Thatcher. But it's a mixture of it's a zine fair at heart. It's also like what I felt was the ossification of leftist book fairs. So you'll have a literary festival class of leftist authors. Every single zine left-wing festival has to have Owen Jones speaking at the end, and someone promoting a book at Verso or Pluto or one of these corporate leftist hegemons. So, you know, at the first DIY Cultures Festival, I just had 7 unemployed people, and it was called the panel was called Unemployment and Creativity. And just very much a gathering of people who are like off the beaten track, who are the antithesis of the mainstream. It's very much it grows out of the campaign I had going for my brother who was detained without trial or charge under the war on terror on a US extradition request, and the sort of communities of solidarity I built around that. And then thinking like, you know, other people who have been affected by state crime or state coercion, and drawing that line. So we've had people like the Hillsborough Solidarity Campaign. We've had autonomous communities like Grow Heathrow, Reclaim Brixton. I think there's all sorts of dissatisfaction that comes out through organising. There's often very instrumentalised Trotskyist parties who might try and use you for a cause. They might be good for doing mass mobilisation, but something gets lost. And it's about this little cluster and villages of all these people. But at another level, you know, a lot of people just like going to DIY Cultures because they've forgotten the love of drawing or craft making or Ludditism or the handmade. There are so many different routes into DIY Cultures, and my pathway isn't necessarily everyone's, and I don't necessarily like everyone in the festival either. So the festival has now become probably the UK's largest zine fair. We take over the entire building, all 4 floors, from the top to the basement. We have about 90, 100 stall holders across 4 floors. You have a lot of independent artist collectives. With the last few years we've been doing a lot of commissioning, so we commissioned a communal table by architecture. So we'll sort of take the term of DIY and look at how it applies towards everything from like science to science fiction to that mode of organising to like architecture, and really taking the sort of aesthetics and ethics and ethos of DIY and see how it applies to new things. And I think we're very conscious of the time we're living in. So, you know, amongst these white exclusive hipster places which don't integrate with the majority of us, you'd see things like a solidarity towards groups like Pussy Riot, for example, but absolutely no concern for, say, the British Muslim prisoners on your doorstep. And I felt that acutely because my brother was detained without trial for marginal association with a obsolete website. And he, you know, I'd talk often when he was in prison. I'd actually read his letters that he'd written in solitary confinement in a death row prison in Connecticut. And there were other group prisons at the time. There's Shaka Amo in Guantanamo Bay, who's also local to us. When Mozambique was in Belmarsh prison, we also kept his memory alive in the festival. And just like rethinking how we think about the state and like government and not necessarily being benevolent. You know, we used to have workshops for the prevent strategy and spoken about that, and that's very much, you know, DIY is about not being a corporation, but it's also about not being too bureaucratic and being dominated by the state. And the state is taking very ugly, intrusive forms with the prevent strategy. So naturally, since it's curated by two Muslims, you know, so naturally we're distrustful of the state and government. One of my all-time heroes is Sheila Coleman of the Hillsborough Justice Campaign, who showed utmost solidarity towards my brother when he was in prison, and as an Irish Catholic, remembered this period during the 70s, and it was a great honour to like invite one of the families, Becky Shah, who shows utmost solidarity towards deaths in custody and many other things. So the first film I directed, which is part of the festival this year, is about the way fanzines helped Hillsborough through the wilderness years when no one really cared about them, when the mainstream media was still very much presenting this narrative of you know, a city responsible for their own deaths. And it wasn't just the Sun, it was things like The Guardian, blaming even the whole culture of the people of Liverpool for like the murder of Jamie Bolger, which I found disgusting, and I found it was like akin to a form of sort of racism with like language or managed population decline and whatever. I think generally, to me, Hillsborough, you can understand how the state, the media, the class system works in Britain just through looking at it closely. And so I've learned an immense amount of from the Hillsborough Justice Campaign. And Hillsborough was, to start with, it was a DIY type, you know, and most of the correct narrative many decades before the inquest were presented in fanzines like What's the Score, Through the Wind, the Rain, Red All Over the Land. And it's also another, you know, in DIY cultures, I'm also interested in like rewriting history, like in a sort of look at overlooked and marginalised histories. So we work with the Stuart Hall Library and we look at forgotten black arts magazines, but we also look at, say, the cultures of creative resistance within football fanzines and terraces and that subculture too. And it's careful, you know, we're also not only internationalists, but we're also becoming increasingly national. So we have people from Bradford, Liverpool, Cardiff. We have this it becomes something of a national gathering for everyone off the beaten track and everyone involved in some form of creative, independent resistance.